Say, Henry?
Yes, it's going to have to be casual. It's been a very packed end of the semester. Nonetheless, I will endeavor to do what I can. First of all, to my warmest thanks to Professor Roger Sederat and the staff of the MFA in Creative Writing and Literary Translation here at Queens College for inviting me and for giving translation the importance I really think it deserves. And until very recently, it was not considered as the art that it is. If you go back several decades, you will even find books that have clearly been translated, but that the translation is simply listed as copyright by the publishing company. So, and certainly in the academic realm, translation has not been given until, again, very recently, and a welcome sign is this program. It has not been given the status it really enjoys. Of course, I'm talking here at Queens College, where Professor Gregory Rabasa was a leading light of the Spanish department, and he, of course, is the translator from Spanish language prose that all of us who try to fill his immense shoes look up to. So that's certainly been the case, but as well until recently, in considering matters like tenure and promotion, translation projects were considered with a certain amount of, if not scorn, then certainly belittlement, as if translation were the equivalent of working on a crossword puzzle or something, where you just follow the clues, and that But what I'm going to do here today is actually, I should say that I'm coming off of a public translation presentation of poems by living poets from an exhibit that's currently at the Americas Society on the friendship of the artist Jules Solar and the writer, who I'm sure all of you know, Jorge Luis Borges, in 1920s Argentina and beyond. And several living poets contributed their own interpretation of Jules Solar's occult, magical kind of works and language. And I was present as a translator, and I found the very rare privilege of actually being, like the poets, mobbed, sort of, and said what a good job I did. So usually it's like the translator would be put out, sort of like, holding the glass of wine while, everybody else says, oh, those were great poets. And, oh yeah, the translator. So times are definitely changing. Now, I'm going to pass around a few things. I'm not going to go into them in huge detail, and I imagine that some of you will have to share, but I'm going to give examples of translation projects I'm working on. One is a poem by Lorenzo Garcia Vega. The original is on there, depending on how you look at it. One's on the obverse and the translation's on the reverse. I'm also offering a short story by a Colombian writer named Héctor Abad, and this is a peculiar kind of challenge because it's one of those short stories that is told in one paragraph. So I'm also passing out the original. Please note that I am violating copyright because, and don't circulate these beyond this place. My translation of the Abad will be appearing in America's, the Americas Society journal called Review within a couple of weeks. So this is, I'm getting a little ahead here. So one note, first of all, I'm listed on here as talking about Spanish literature in translation, and I have yet to do anything from the peninsula. So technically I am doing American literature written in Spanish in translation. That's mostly been my focus. I'm self-taught in Spanish pretty much, but I got help because my two marriages, both of which are in the past. Talk about oversharing, were both to Mexican women. And so therefore there's nothing quite like a personal relationship for learning a language fast. Even though they spoke English perfectly well, I wasn't content with being the gringo. So I picked up Spanish through my own reading and conversation and travels, and eventually thought I would try my hand at it. I think something is very, when you talk about Spanish literature, literature written in Spanish and translation, I think there are several things that are very important to keep in mind. And one is that in the Caribbean and Latin America, not to mention that literature written in Spanish here in the United States, of which there is a long and rich tradition dating to even before the United States as we currently know it was formed. What's important is to keep in mind, cultural nuances, because it's often the case that a word that means one thing in one part of, I'll call it for convenience, Latin America, though I don't like that term very much, what may work in one country, say, or one area, will not necessarily mean the same in another. Every text is a product of its immediate cultural environment, which is why, and the people from my advanced seminar in Comp Lit will testify to that, I am teaching Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude as a Colombian novel, first and foremost, that's grounded in the specificities, admittedly exaggerated and imagined, of Colombian history. And that is something that can be followed. You can even date approximately how long those 100 years of solitude were. My guess is it's from 1848 to 1948, give or take a couple of years, because of the historical markers that are in there. What can happen if you aren't aware of cultural subtleties are even blind Homer sometimes nods, and Gregory Rabassa in his magisterial translation of the most complex, sometimes infuriating, but ultimately brilliant novel of the 50s and 60s in Latin America, Paradiso, by the Cuban poet José Lezama Lima. He translated El Vedado, which is a neighborhood in Havana, as the Forbidden City, as if we were in Beijing, because he translated the word Vedado literally, instead of, and he's of Cuban extraction himself, as I said, even blind Homer sometimes nods. But these are like little details that one should always be aware of. Another question is the age-old problem of how to translate colloquial speech from one language into another. My favorite example is, okay, try and translate into English, into Spanish, French, whatever language. I got soul, I'm super bad, by James Brown. I dare you, you won't be able to do it. Tengo alma y soy bien malo. No, sorry. So, likewise, if you try to, say, translate Cuban colloquial speech into American English, you run a very grave danger. And what is Cuban colloquial speech? It's highly inflected by African, like all Caribbean language, it's highly inflected by the African languages. In Cuba's case, the Congo and the Yoruba. Even now, people call each other, oye, acere, and acere is like, from the Calabar language of Nigeria, but now it just means buddy, or somebody who's really close to you as mi ecobio, which is like my lodge brother in the Abaquá sect. So, how do you translate that? Because there are all kinds of ways, mi socio, oye, mi socio, you can translate that as buddy. But, there's all these nuances. And it's not insulting for Cuban speech to be transcribed on the page. But it becomes insulting when, if you're translating it into English, it comes out like what the French would call petit nègre, into this kind of, Uncle Remus-y sort of, sort of degrading minstrel type dialect, which unfortunately no less a translator than Suzanne Jill Levine has done with the monologue that Guillermo Cabrera Infante, the great Cuban writer, transcribed of a shoeshine man who has just seen the film of Julius Caesar starring Marlon Brando, and he's talking about bueno, este tipo que se llama Cecil and stuff like that. So it's but it's translated and you can't read it, because it's like this is like it's total minstrelsy. This just does not work. So the question is, how do you translate it? And I've sometimes suggested, all right, translate it into Jamaican patois, which you have to know pretty well because that's a language in and of itself. But it's not in Jamaica that they're talking in Cuba. So you can't transpose one cultural ambience onto another for the sake of translation. So what I would probably do is try and take a leaf from, say, the Langston Hugheses or the Sterling Browns, African American poets, and put it into more or less a stylized kind of colloquial speech, that won't offend anybody who would read it. So all kinds of issues here, where translating Latin American is concerned. And of course you have bilingual writers like the late lamented Pedro Pietri who use both, right? And you have people like Ilan Stevans, who made a big deal about trying to translate the Quixote into Spanglish. It wasn't even good Spanglish. I mean, face it, Spanglish moves with the rhythm. Spanglish moves, it has to sound right. And it all sounded wrong. It sounded like a Mexican academic who decided to write something in Spanglish and said, gee, this will be kind of neat and cool, and and it'll offend people who guard the Spanish language. But if you're going to do it, you have to do it well. So my current projects, I did 15 minutes on this, and I'm going to do 15 minutes on my current projects, and then we can open it up for discussion and questions, which is really, those are the lifeblood of these gatherings appropriately. I should also add, since I mentioned Cabrera Infante, Three Trapped Tigers is a book really very much about translation, so I'll just refer you to that. It's a really wonderful book, translated by the author and Jill Levine, and it's, and he says it's written in Cuban Spanish, so even Castilians would have to do a little translation. I'm working on a large-scale project of the selected writings of a Cuban poet, Lorenzo Garcia Vega, both poetry and prose. I was fortunate enough to meet him and to exchange some emails with him. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. He was well into his 80s in any case, but at least he knew this project was happening and had seen some of my work. I like to tackle difficult projects when I'm translating. I think that's very, very important because, as José Lezama Lima said, whom I mentioned earlier, solo lo difícil es estimulante, only the difficult stimulates. And that's an aphorism that can apply to various walks of life, I might add. So, what Lorenzo does is he is in rebellion against the very same Cuban poetic tradition that he became a part of, which is to say, the Baroque, the convoluted, the Jesuitical, the Catholic, the solemn, and instead of taking Cuban poets for his models, he takes people like John Cage, Zen Buddhism, Norman O. Brown, Michel Leiris, Raymond Roussel, and other people who are sort of like outliers from the canon. And he is, in a certain sense, a kind of outlier. He calls himself an autistic poet himself because he is like, in a way, he's talking to himself and going over his private obsessions and dreams. He called himself in a Baroque image that he probably would get angry if you reminded him of the fact. He's putting together a labyrinth, right? His motto said, don't die without a labyrinth, no mueras sin laberinto. And the labyrinth is the labyrinth of himself in a certain kind of way. His obsessions, his childhood memories, the sights he sees. He was living in Miami for a long time and he hated it, so he gave it a new name, Albino Beach, Playa Albina. So all the references are there to Albino Beach, and you say, oh, well, that's Miami. So he will look at a mattress that's cast off in a vacant lot, and the mattress is all stained, and that mattress will come back in a lot of his poems. But his poems do not follow a kind of logical order. He is constantly breaking up, as you'll see, he is constantly breaking up the forward movement of the poem. And so the question is, all right, one other thing that I find with a lot of translations is they like to smooth things over, but I'm a great devotee of Charles Olson's observation that you have to, leave the dirt on. You have to, show the roots and leave the dirt on, to show where they come from. And so the irregularities should be kept as they were. So I'm just going to look at this very briefly, the Toad's Leap, Salto del Sapo, and it's from an untranslatable title, Textilandia Albina, which I think, you can leave that untranslated. And it is, if you will, this poem is about the impossibility of writing this particular poem. He's saying, I could do this, I could do that, or maybe I could do this, and he's like talking to himself. And there are puns, like in the original here, it's several lines from the bottom. Poder fingir que fuera quien? Yo, por supuesto. So you have, me, of course. It's like, the identity is always slipping away from him, and the poem is slipping away from him. Un alquimista, oh, hasta me conformaría con ser un simple maquinista. So that's easy enough, an alchemist and a machinist. And he says, pues no soy un piraguas, sino lo semejante a un piraguas. I'm not an umbrella, but something like an umbrella, possibly mortal. And then you have to think, well, what's an umbrella do? Of course you're not an umbrella, but then you think of Magritte's Hegel's Vacation, which is an umbrella with a glass of water on top of it. And then you think, oh, okay, so this has something to do perhaps with philosophy, in which he has a PhD. In fact, he has a PhD in literature. And what job did he get in Miami? Watch out for PhD candidates. He was a bag boy in a public supermarket for several years. Even had a picture of him in his bag boy uniform, standing quite proudly, I might add. So something like an umbrella, probably mortal. Well, as we all know, umbrellas are mortal. During the rainy season in New York, we go through several at a time. There's nothing more mortal than an umbrella. And he's saying that so is the umbrella probably mortal, or is he probably mortal? Well, I mean, you don't know you're mortal until you die, right? So you think about all these things. And when he says y dicho y hecho, which is a common word, the second to the last line, y dicho y hecho entonces como lo oyen, y así mismo, entonces, así mismo, tal como lo oyen. I decided to go towards a good old Caribbean phrase, so said, so done. Dicho y hecho. They say, so, they use it in Jamaica, so said, so done. Just then, as you hear it, and just so then, just as you hear it, y así mismo, entonces así mismo, tal como lo oyen. Clichés are put together in a certain way as to render them absent of cliché because of the concept they're in. And then, of course, you think of the Toad's Leap. It's like, what is that? Salto del Sapo. Well, who knows? I mean, so what I wanted to do in this poem was also to keep the conversational level. because in a way, Lorenzo is like a Buster Keaton type, or a Cantinflas type. I don't know if any of you have seen Cantinflas, right? The great Mexican comedian who, does like this kind of mock bullfight, and his pants are always falling down. It's like in a strange anticipation of hip-hop style in the 40s. His pants are falling down around his legs, and he's like the peludo, and he does this whole mock thing with a bullfight. Well, in a way, Lorenzo's doing that too, except it's with the Minotaur at the center of his labyrinth, right? And actually, Cantinflas does fight a real bull. That's, we think of Marion Moore's Real Toads in Imaginary Gardens, for instance. So that is the kind of, and I think when I'm doing Baroque of any kind of somebody like Marion Moore, not many people read her anymore, but she's very much worth looking into for that kind of sinuosity and that kind of, abrupt, these abrupt intrusions. So I think when you translate, you should also have a writer that you kind of like see, well, I want to have it come out, it sounds kind of like this writer in English, which means you have to have, ideally, a very wide level of reading. That's, I think, indispensable for the translator of any type. Now, secondly, I just wanted, again, to, not really to go over this. This is the story by Hector Abad, who recently had a book published in his, in translation. Here, I believe it was by Anne McLean, who translates a lot of Colombian literature these days. It's about his father who was killed by sicarios, by hitmen. And this story is about his own fears. And the approach I took to translating it, since it's all in one single paragraph internal monologue, was Gregory Rabas's method. He never reads something before he never reads something before he translates. He just throws himself right in and just starts going. And because of the continuous nature of this, because of the panic and fear, I wanted to just sit down and do it non-stop from start to finish and then revise it later, because I think that rush, that kind of, breathless quality I wanted to achieve in the translation. Not lingering too long, not even looking for le mot juste, the correct word, but just zipping right through. And because there was ample opportunity to use colloquial language, which I love doing, the problem, and pardon my Anglo-Saxon and pardon any Colombians who are here, one of the main, the worst kind of insult that you can give. There are two really terrible insults that you can call a Colombian. One is gonorrhea, as in the sexually transmitted disease, and the other is malparido, which is to say somebody who was born incorrectly or something. You say, well, how's that insulting? Ask a Colombian, and it might be the last thing you say, mira gonorrhea. And so, but how do you can't translate, badly birthed and gonorrhea into English. It lacks all things. So I use the word fuckwad, because, which, is that kind of like rough, horrid sort of way, and son of a bitch, that's easy enough if you make it into one word, and piece of shit, because this is also the strange sort of American obsession with excrement, that somebody is a shithead, or that fucking, again, pardon my Anglo-Saxon, is always seen as something insulting. Lenny Bruce used to say, it's better to say unfuck you. Because, that's what I said, But that's the kind of thing that I had to confront. There was another thing. It shifts part way in the monologue to a quotation from an early 20th century Colombian poet named Leon de Graef, who was really influential in, and it's marked here, so I didn't have to guess, He says, well, I'm thinking of just, reading my Leon de Graef. And Leon de Graef wrote in a very odd Spanish. I mean, many of you who know Colombians say that they think that, Colombians think that they speak the best Spanish in all the Spanish-speaking world. At least that doesn't apply to the comunas, I would imagine, but Leon de Graef writes in a kind of an archaizing English. And all of a sudden, as he's, kidnapped by, he's fearing that he's recreating the scene of being kidnapped by these hitmen from whatever political force, whatever gang or group or paramilitary group or police group or guerrilla group, he starts going over this poetry. It's very hard to find it, but because this is all in one breath. But I believe it's somewhere on the third page or the second page. I'm not sure. I'm going to kind of. Okay, here it is. It's about a little above halfway through the page, and the first line, the first three words on the line are Leon de Graef. It's on page 3. So I thought, I don't know how I'm going to put this over. So what did I do? With the miracle of modern technology, I found that if you go online, you will find Leon de Graef reading the self-same poem, and it's printed out, and I say, oh, that's what it is. Okay, I can understand it better if the lines are broken up and not written continuously like this. Miren cómo se hacen las cosas. I'll tell you. Leon de Graef to myself. Okay, I yearn to be alone. I care not for company. I would look closely at silence. I care not for murmurs nigh to me. If song's subterranean voice should come, let it come in quietude. If it's a clamorous song, let my muteness insult it. If it brings much music, let it sound in quietude. If it's a clamorous song, let my music insult it. If it brings much music, let it sound in Hades, or in any region near black Hades, silence, noise, ill-omened street cry. I yearn to be alone, nor care I for company. I would look closely at silence, my only delicacy. And you see, that's a very archaizing sort of work, and then it jumps in, and they'll laugh. They'll say, look at him, to think he was an atheist. Look at how the son of a bitch is praying. Now the fuckwad's shitting himself with fear, and with a pair of nail clippers, they'll rip out a piece of my side to make me squeal like a pig. But I won't have the breath to cry out. Terror will have silenced me forever, already dead even before they kill me, and my hands will keep trembling, and a cold sweat will still be soaking my shirt, and the blood from the piece of my side will be dripping down my pants. They'll also give the dog a bullet before carrying me off. He'll come out with his tail between his legs. He'll come close to smell me as if to say goodbye. He'll wag his tail at me. He'll manage to get it out from between his legs. He'll give my shoes a good lick, and at that moment a shot will go through his head, and I'll know that in a short time a shot will go through my head too. Everything's sick with hatred in this place. So you see what a tremendous kind of shift from this kind of, I want to be, the solitude poem, which is part of this great poetic tradition, not too well known here, but everybody knows this poem apparently in Colombia, and the switch from that register to the kind of colloquial, to the kind of colloquial register. There's also talk about, they're going to take his ATM card, right, which is a standard kidnapping approach, and they're going to draw out all the money they possibly can. So the word is clave, right? But you don't use the word code or key for, here in the States. You use PIN number. So in goes the PIN number, right? Everybody can recognize that, because we also have to consider our audience, right? And, there's another one too. On the last page, the final moment is very lyrical. So it was important for me to get that lyrical kind of quality into there. I mean, you all have the original, so those of you with Spanish can, kibitz, which of course is the job of every reader. And as a comp litter, I always say, well, you know, it's not a bad translation, but there are some things wrong with it. And I go away feeling quite pleased with myself. So I don't see why anybody else can't do that either. But I already see, I already see an error here. So there you go, you know. We'll go to the very top. In any case, when they come, I won't know who's coming. See, this is the when they come, I won't know who's coming. The murderers to kill me, or the burglars to rob me, or the guerrillas to kidnap me, or the same ones who are coming to arrange an interview with the chief. And then sometimes I think, why shouldn't I go to the 4th Brigade to buy a pistol and ask for a permit? I'm not going down easy. Now, the literal phrase there is, no voy a vender duro el pellejo. You know, which, if you translate that literally, it sounds funny. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna sell my skin, for, I'm gonna sell my skin for, I'm not gonna be easy with how I sell my skin. But I think, in English, I'm not going down easy, is colloquial, and it conveys the same thing. So therefore, final lesson, no matter what language you translate from, you have to really have an excellent grasp of the home language. I don't like the language of source and target. It's like we're drawing a bead on the language and we're firing a bullet through its heart or its dictionary. It's like, this dictionary, it's like it stops a bullet, but it's there for convenience in any case. But, three things: to master your own language in terms of writing. That way you avoid translationese, which I was, the warmest congratulation I got the other night was from this guy who said, you avoided any hint of translationese. I almost fell to my knees, because that's like the highest praise you could possibly imagine. The second is to be aware of the specific cultural context the text is coming out of, the country, at least have some idea also of the literary tradition that's there in the country. In other words, with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, understand that, he is coming out of a specifically Colombian literary tradition, as well as Rabelais and the Quixote and all these other things, and understand the specific cultural references to the extent possible. And thirdly, have a good time doing it, because without that, without the love, right, which Benjamin talks about in his famous essay on translation, which is by now canonical, if we're going to put the broken vase together, it's going to have to be, with love. So, love the text you're doing, and, revise, revise, revise as you would for your own writing, because this is the highest tribute. A translator is essentially paying a tribute, paying a debt off to the person the writer who's written that text. So, I think I'll stop right there and take questions, comments, brickbats, observations, and anything else. I mean, you can of course keep these. I mean, it's there for reference. Yes, Professor Hahn.